Montana Territory, 1875. The merciless winter had finally relinquished its grip on the land, leaving behind a hopeful spring that promised new beginnings. Young Yates Keller believed that promise was meant for everyone except him. At 26, he had already seen too much death, faced too many empty horizons, and watched too many good men lose their souls to the bottle or the gun. The frontier had taught him one immutable truth: attachments were dangerous. Love was a luxury that cowboys like him could not afford, not when each dawn might be their last. "A man rides alone out here," he would say whenever the subject of settling down arose. "The moment you tie yourself to someone, you give this cruel country another way to break you." Yates had built his life around this conviction. He worked harder than most, breaking wild horses that other men feared to approach, driving cattle through territories where outlaws waited in shadowed canyons. His skill with horses and quiet competence had earned him respect at the Diamond Creek Ranch, where he'd been working for 3 seasons. The owner, Samuel Taylor, paid fair wages and treated his men well, but Yates never allowed himself to feel at home. Home meant roots, roots meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was death on the frontier. What Yates truly wanted was enough money to buy a small spread of his own, not to build a family, but to have something that belonged to him alone. A place where he answered to no one, where the burden of responsibility extended no further than himself and his horses. He told himself this was enough, that the hollow feeling in his chest on cold nights was just hunger or fatigue, never loneliness. Yet sometimes, in the deepest watches of the night when the campfire burned low and the stars stretched endlessly above him, Yates would feel a yearning for something he could not name. He'd watch the married ranch hands ride back to their small cabins where light glowed in windows and children's laughter spilled into the dusk. In those unguarded moments, before he hardened his heart again, he wondered if his truth was actually a lie he told himself to avoid the risk of heartbreak. Spring planting was finished when Samuel Taylor called Yates to the main house, a 2-story structure that stood as a testament to civilization amidst the wilderness. "I need you to ride to Silver Creek," Taylor said, his weathered face serious beneath his gray beard. "The supply wagon is 3 days overdue, and the spring celebration is next week. Pastor Miller is supposed to perform 4 weddings that day." Yates nodded, already calculating the journey. Could be mud from the thaw slowing them down. "I'll find them. Take the southern trail. Word is, Blackwater gang's been spotted north of here." Yates touched the revolver at his hip. "I can handle trouble." "I know you can, son," Taylor said. "But no heroics. Just find that wagon and escort it back." The 60-mile ride to Silver Creek would take a day and a half at a steady pace. Yates packed light, selecting his most reliable mount, a dappled gray stallion named Ghost who could outrun most horses in the territory. As he rode out at dawn, the ranch hands waved goodbye, but Yates didn't look back. Attachments were dangerous. The land sprawled before him, painted in the tender greens of spring, dotted with wildflowers that defied the harsh realities of frontier life. Silver Creek appeared on the horizon late the next day, a cluster of wooden buildings huddled against the wilderness like survivors in a storm. The town had grown since Yates had last visited, with new construction stretching along the main street. Prosperity had found its way here, at least temporarily. Yates made for the general store, where the supply wagon would have loaded its cargo. The storekeeper, a rail-thin man named Wilson, confirmed his fears. "Wagon left 4 days ago. Should have reached Diamond Creek by now. Any word of trouble on the trail?" Wilson shook his head. "Nothing specific, but folks are nervous. Blackwater gang's been raiding settlements north of here." Yates nodded grimly. "I'll head back tomorrow at first light. See if I can pick up their trail." With evening falling, he secured a room at the Silver Spur Hotel and headed to the saloon for a hot meal. The establishment was crowded, filled with the usual mix of ranch hands, miners, and drifters that populated frontier towns. Yates found a corner table and ordered beef stew from a harried-looking waitress. He was halfway through his meal when the saloon doors burst open. A young woman stumbled in, her wedding dress torn and muddied at the hem, her chestnut hair falling in disarray from what had once been an elegant arrangement. Her face was tear-stained but composed in a mask of dignity that seemed ready to shatter at any moment. The saloon fell silent as she stood there, scanning the room with emerald eyes that held both fury and heartbreak. "Miss Rosalyn," Please, the barkeeper said, moving toward her. You shouldn't be here. Is there anywhere I should be, Mr. Grady? She asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The church no longer seems appropriate, considering the circumstances. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Yates remained still, watching as the young woman, Rosalyn, made her way to the bar. She couldn't have been more than 22, with a face that would have been striking even without the heightened color emotion brought to her cheeks. Whiskey, she said, placing a coin on the counter. And information, if anyone has it. I'd like to know where Mr. James Peterson was headed when he decided my company at the altar was no longer required. The barkeeper hesitated, then poured her a small glass. Miss Rosalyn Ellis, your father will have my hide. My father, she interrupted, is currently at home consoling my mother over the shame that has befallen our family. I doubt very much he'll notice my absence for at least another hour. She downed the whiskey in one swallow, grimaced, and set the glass down firmly. Now, about Mr. Peterson. An older miner cleared his throat. Saw him riding north with his brother about 3 hours ago, miss. Had his bags packed. Said something about a gold strike near Fort Benton. 3 hours, she repeated, her voice hollow. 3 hours and 35 minutes after he was meant to say I do. The barkeeper refilled her glass without being asked. Miss Rosalyn, let me send someone to fetch your aunt. You shouldn't be alone right now. I've been alone since the moment he walked out of that church, Mr. Grady. She raised the glass again, but didn't drink. Instead, she stared into the amber liquid as though it held answers to questions she hadn't yet formulated. 4 years of courtship. 4 years of promises. And he couldn't even tell me to my face. Yates didn't mean to speak. He'd spent years perfecting the art of minding his own business. But something about her dignity in the face of such public humiliation moved him. Some men aren't worth the ground they walk on, miss, he said quietly. She turned, noticing him for the first time. Their eyes met across the room, and Yates felt an unexpected jolt, as though he'd touched a lightning-struck tree. She studied him for a moment, then raised her glass in a mock toast. To honesty, sir, however belated. I only wish Mr. Peterson had possessed your insight into his own character. Before Yates could respond, the saloon doors opened again. This time, a man in his 50s entered, his face tight with concern and embarrassment. Rosalyn Elizabeth Ellis, he said, his voice strained. Your mother is beside herself. Father. Rosalyn set down her untouched second whiskey. How kind of you to join me. Would you care for a drink? I'm told it dulls all manner of pain. The man, clearly a person of standing in Silver Creek by his fine clothes, crossed to his daughter and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Come home, Rosie. This isn't helping anything. For a moment, rebellion flashed in her eyes, but then her shoulders slumped slightly. Very well. I suppose I've created enough scandal for one day. As her father guided her toward the door, Rosalyn paused and looked back at Yates. Thank you for your candor, sir. It's a rare commodity today. Yates nodded, uncertain why her acknowledgement affected him so. After they left, the saloon gradually resumed its normal volume. The incident already becoming the stuff of local legend. The jilted bride who sought whiskey instead of tears. But Yates couldn't shake the image of those emerald eyes, proud even in humiliation. He finished his meal quickly and headed upstairs to his room, determined to leave at first light to search for the missing wagon. His mind should have been on the task ahead, calculating possible routes and preparing for potential dangers. Instead, he found himself wondering what kind of fool would leave a woman like Rosalyn Ellis standing alone at the altar. Not your concern, Keller, he muttered to himself as he checked his revolver and rifle before turning in. Remember the rule. No attachments. But sleep came uneasily that night, filled with dreams of emerald eyes and a wedding dress muddied at the hem. Dawn had barely broken when Yates led Ghost from the livery stable. The streets of Silver Creek were quiet, most of its inhabitants still abed after the previous night's entertainment. He was securing his saddlebags when a voice called out behind him. Mr. Keller? He turned to find Rosalyn Ellis standing there, dressed now in a practical riding outfit of dark blue, her chestnut hair braided and pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She looked different from the wounded bride of the previous evening, composed, determined, and impossibly more beautiful in the clear morning light. Miss Ellis, he acknowledged, tipping his hat. How did you know my name? Small towns have long memories and loose tongues, Mr. Keller. The hotel clerk was most informative. She stepped closer, her hands clasped before her. I understand you're searching for a missing supply wagon. Yates nodded warily. That's right. I wish to accompany you. Of all the things she might have said, this was perhaps the last he expected. That's not possible, Miss Ellis. I assure you it is. I'm an excellent rider. I know these trails better than most, and I have reasons of my own for wanting to leave Silver Creek immediately. It could be dangerous, Yates said, studying her face for signs of the previous night's distress. He found none. The wagon might have encountered trouble. All the more reason to have two pairs of eyes instead of one. She gestured to a saddled palomino tethered nearby. I'm prepared to leave immediately, with or without your permission. Does your father know you're here? A flash of defiance crossed her features. I left a letter. He'll understand eventually. Yates sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. Miss Ellis. Mr. Keller, she interrupted. Yesterday I was humiliated in front of the entire town. If I stay, I'll be the object of pity and gossip for months to come. I cannot bear it. Her voice remained steady, but he saw the cost of that control in her eyes. I'm asking you to allow me the dignity of escape, at least for a few days. Perhaps it was the quiet determination in her voice, or the memory of her standing alone in that muddied wedding dress. Whatever the reason, Yates found himself nodding. 2 days, he said firmly. We search for 2 days. If we haven't found the wagon by then, I'm bringing you back to your father. Relief softened her features. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Miss Ellis. The trail will be hard, and we'll be sleeping rough. I've camped before, Mr. Keller. I won't slow you down. Yates doubted that, but kept his thoughts to himself as he mounted Ghost. Rosalyn swung into her saddle with a grace that suggested she hadn't exaggerated her riding abilities. They set off as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, leaving Silver Creek behind without a backward glance. They rode in silence for the first hour, following the main trail back toward Diamond Creek Ranch. Rosalyn kept pace easily, sitting her horse with the natural ease of someone who had grown up in the saddle. Eventually, Yates's curiosity got the better of him. Your father let you camp? He asked, breaking the silence. A small smile touched her lips. My father raised me to be self-sufficient after my mother took ill when I was 12. She recovered, but by then, I had developed a taste for the outdoors. She glanced at him. Does that surprise you? Out here, little surprises me anymore, Yates replied. Except perhaps a woman in a wedding dress ordering whiskey. Her smile faded. Yes, well, unusual circumstances call for unusual responses. If you don't mind my asking what happened. Rosalyn was quiet for so long that Yates thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. James and I had been courting for 4 years. He was the son of Silver Creek's only doctor, well-respected, seemingly reliable. The wedding was planned for months. She straightened her shoulders. Yesterday, as I waited in the church vestry, his brother brought me a note. It said only that he was sorry, but he couldn't go through with it. That he had realized he wanted more from life than Silver Creek could offer. Yates felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man. And he couldn't tell you this before you were in your wedding dress? Apparently not. She looked ahead at the trail. The worst part was standing before everyone, explaining that there would be no wedding. The pity in their eyes. She shook her head. I would rather face a pack of wolves. Some men don't deserve the women who love them, Yates said quietly. Rosalyn studied him. And what about you, Mr. Keller? Are you deserving of love? The question caught him off guard. I don't much think about it, he answered honestly. Love isn't part of a cowboy's life. A convenient belief, she observed. It spares you the risk of disappointment. Her insight struck uncomfortably close to the truth Yates had built his life around. Before he could formulate a response, she pointed to the trail ahead. Look there. Wool tracks, relatively fresh. Grateful for the distraction, Yates dismounted to examine the trail. Good eye, he acknowledged. This could be our wagon. He traced the depth of the ruts. Heavily loaded, moving slow. They followed the tracks through the morning, the trail leading them away from the main route and into more rugged country. By midday, Yates was increasingly concerned. The wagon had veered far from the usual path between Silver Creek and Diamond Creek Ranch. They're lost, Rosalyn said, voicing his thoughts as they stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream. Or deliberately taking a different route. Yates frowned, scanning the horizon. Could be trying to avoid trouble. And finding it instead, she said, pointing to a stand of cottonwoods ahead where ravens circled. Something's dead up there. Yates drew his rifle from its scabbard. Stay here. I will not, she countered, checking the small revolver she carried in her saddlebag. We agreed to work together. He wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. Stay behind me, then. And if I tell you to run, you run. No questions. They approached the cottonwoods cautiously. The ravens' cawing grew louder, and soon the smell reached them, the unmistakable scent of death. In a small clearing among the trees lay the bodies of 2 mules, still harnessed but cut free from their wagon. Arrows, Rosalyn said quietly, pointing to the shafts protruding from one animal's flank. Yates nodded grimly. Cheyenne, by the markings. He surveyed the area. No human bodies, though, and no wagon. They searched the clearing thoroughly, finding signs of a struggle, bloodstains that didn't belong to the mules, cartridge casings from at least 2 different firearms, and the clear trail where the wagon had been dragged away, minus its team. Whoever was driving put up a fight, Yates said, examining a broken arrow shaft. But they were outnumbered. Taken prisoner? Rosalyn asked, her face pale but composed. Possibly. The Cheyenne in these parts usually avoid killing if they can. Might be hoping to trade for ransom. He pointed to the new trail. Wagons headed northwest. Deeper into Cheyenne territory. Rosalyn straightened, determination evident in every line of her body. Then so are we. Miss Ellis, Yates began, already knowing the argument was lost. This changes everything. We need to ride back to Silver Creek, gather a proper search party. That would take days, she countered. If there are wounded men with that wagon, they may not have days. She met his gaze steadily. You can return if you wish. I'm following this trail. Yates stared at her, torn between admiration for her courage and frustration at her recklessness. You don't even know these men. No, she agreed. But neither do you. And yet here you are. She adjusted her hat. Besides, would returning to Silver Creek not violate your agreement to help me escape for a few days? Despite the gravity of the situation, Yates found himself fighting a smile. You're stubborn, Miss Ellis. So I've been told, Mr. Keller. She mounted her horse. Shall we continue? They followed the wagon trail until dusk, making steady progress through increasingly unfamiliar territory. The tracks told a clear story, a heavy wagon dragged by at least 6 horses, accompanied by multiple riders. When the light grew too dim to safely continue, they made camp in a sheltered draw beside a small creek. Yates built a small, nearly smokeless fire while Rosalyn prepared a simple meal from their provisions. They ate in companionable silence, the gravity of their mission tempering any inclination toward casual conversation. After they had finished, Rosalyn surprised him by producing a small flask from her saddlebag. Medicinal purposes, she explained, offering it to him. My father doesn't know I took it. Yates accepted the flask, taking a cautious sip. Good whiskey burned down his throat. You're full of surprises, Miss Ellis. Rosalyn, she said, if we're risking our lives together, I think formality is rather unnecessary. Yates, he offered in return, passing the flask back. Yates, she repeated, testing the name. It suits you. She took a small sip and grimaced at the burn. May I ask you something? He nodded, watching the firelight play across her features. Why did you agree to let me come with you? The truth, please. Yates considered the question. I reckon everyone deserves the chance to outrun their ghosts for a while. Is that what you've been doing? Outrunning ghosts. He stared into the fire. Something like that. What happened? She asked softly. Perhaps it was the whiskey, or the strange intimacy that danger creates between strangers. Whatever the reason, Yates found himself speaking of things he rarely acknowledged even to himself. I had a younger brother, he said. We grew up on a small ranch in Colorado. Parents died of fever when I was 18. Timothy was 15. We managed on our own for a while, but it was hard. Rosalyn listened silently, her eyes never leaving his face. When Timothy turned 17, he got it in his head that we could make our fortune faster in the gold fields. I told him it was a fool's errand, that we should focus on building what we had. Yates picked up a stick and poked at the fire. We argued. Said things you can't take back. He left that night. Did you go after him? She asked. Yates shook his head. I was too proud. Figured he'd come back when he was hungry enough. He drew a deep breath. 6 months later, I got word he'd been killed in a claim dispute. shot in the back by a man he thought was his partner. Rosalyn reached across the fire and touched his hand briefly. I'm sorry. After that, I couldn't stay at the ranch. Too many memories. Sold it and started drifting. He met her eyes. Learned that getting attached to people, to places, it just gives life more targets to aim at. So you became a ghost yourself, she said quietly. The insight struck him like a physical blow. I suppose I did. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. I was going to marry James because I was afraid, Rosalyn finally said. Afraid of ending up alone, of disappointing my parents, of what people would say if I remained unmarried. She twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. When he left me at the altar, after the initial shock and humiliation, I felt relieved. She looked up at Yates. Is that terrible? No, he said. It sounds like you both escaped something that wasn't right. Perhaps, she agreed. But now I wonder if I'll ever trust anyone enough to try again. You trusted me enough to ride into Cheyenne territory, Yates pointed out. A smile touched her lips. So I did. Perhaps I'm not as cautious as I should be. Or perhaps you recognize honesty when you see it, he said. Their eyes met across the fire, and Yates felt something shift between them. A connection forming that contradicted everything he believed about keeping people at a distance. He looked away first, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through his chest. We should get some rest, he said, standing. Tomorrow will be a long day. Rosalyn nodded, unrolling her bedroll on her side of the fire. Good night, Yates. Good night, he replied, settling on his own blanket with his rifle close at hand. Sleep came reluctantly, his mind too full of emerald eyes and confessions shared across firelight. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed not of his brother's ghost, but of a woman in a wedding dress, walking away from a church toward the open prairie, her face turned toward the sunrise. They broke camp before dawn, cold biscuits and jerky serving as breakfast as they saddled the horses. The wagon tracks continued northwest, and Yates estimated they were gaining ground on their quarry. Wagons moving slow, he explained as they rode. We should catch sight of them by midday if they've stopped. And if they haven't, Rosalyn asked. Then we follow until we do, he said simply. The landscape changed as they rode, the rolling prairie giving way to rougher country cut by deep ravines and dotted with stands of pine. By late morning, they had reached a series of low hills that provided cover as they advanced. There, Yates said suddenly, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from a sheltered valley ahead. That's them. They dismounted and secured their horses, then crept forward on foot to the crest of a hill overlooking the encampment. Below, they could see the supply wagon surrounded by about a dozen Cheyenne warriors. Near the wagon, 2 white men sat bound but appeared unharmed. The driver and his assistant, Yates whispered. Looks like they're alive. Thank God, Rosalyn breathed. What's the plan? Yates assessed the situation. We're outnumbered. Can't fight our way in. Could we negotiate? Offer something in trade? He considered this. Possibly. The Cheyenne respect courage. If we ride in openly, show we're not afraid, they might listen. And if they don't, she asked. Then we die bravely, he said with grim humor. But I don't think it'll come to that. These don't look like renegades. See how they've treated the prisoners? No torture, giving them food. Rosalyn nodded. I trust your judgment. The simple statement affected Yates more than it should have. Stay close to me, he instructed. Let me do the talking. They retrieved their horses and rode slowly, deliberately down the hillside toward the camp. The Cheyenne spotted them immediately, warriors rising with weapons ready. Yates kept his hands visible and his pace unhurried, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. Beside him, Rosalyn sat tall in her saddle, chin raised, showing no fear. A warrior who appeared to be the leader stepped forward as they approached, his hand resting on a revolver at his hip. Yates halted at a respectful distance and raised his hand in greeting. We come in peace, he said in the broken Cheyenne he had learned from years on the frontier. The leader studied them, his weathered face revealing nothing. Why do you follow us? He asked in surprisingly good English. We seek the men you have taken, Yates replied honestly. They carry supplies needed by our people. The leader gestured to the wagon. These things were passing through our hunting grounds without permission. The men did not know, Rosalyn spoke up, her voice clear and steady. They meant no disrespect to your people. The Cheyenne leader's eyes narrowed as he assessed Rosalyn. Why does a woman ride into danger for men she does not know? Before Yates could intervene, Rosalyn answered, because it is right to help those in need. Would your women not do the same? A murmur ran through the gathered warriors, and Yates held his breath. Rosalyn's directness could either offend or impress. There was no middle ground with the Cheyenne. After a long moment, the leader's face relaxed slightly. My name is Two Hawks. My people do not wish for war with the white settlers, but we grow tired of trespassers who show no respect for our boundaries. We understand, Yates said. What would you consider fair payment for the safe return of the men and wagon? Two Hawks named his price: medicines, blankets, and ammunition. Yates countered with what they could reasonably provide, and after some negotiation, they reached an agreement. The supplies would be delivered to a designated meeting place in 1 week's time. Until then, Two Hawks said, one of you stays as guarantee. Yates immediately stepped forward. I will stay. No. Two Hawks pointed to Rosalyn. She stays. A woman of courage is a valuable hostage. No harm will come to her. Yates felt his heart seize. That's not acceptable. It's all right, Rosalyn said, touching his arm lightly. I'll stay. Rosalyn, no, he said urgently, forgetting their audience. It's too dangerous. She met his eyes steadily. You need to deliver the wagon and arrange the payment. I'll be fine. She turned to Two Hawks. I accept your terms, but I expect to be treated with respect. The Cheyenne leader nodded. You will be given the hospitality of my wife's lodge. When the payment comes, you go free. Yates wanted to object further, but Rosalyn's determined expression stopped him. She was right. Someone had to take the wagon back and organize the payment, and she would likely be safer as a respected hostage than trying to outrun warriors if they attempted to flee. 1 week, he said to Two Hawks. Not a day longer. The Cheyenne nodded, and the agreement was sealed. The bound men were released into Yates's custody, along with the wagon and its supplies. As the freed driver and his assistant climbed onto the wagon seat, Yates pulled Rosalyn aside. I'll be back before the week is out, he promised. With the payment and enough men to ensure your safe return. I know you will, she said, her confidence in him both humbling and terrifying. Impulsively, he reached out and took her hand. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed in Silver Creek. You could have refused to be their hostage. Rosalyn looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. Perhaps I needed to prove something to myself after being abandoned at the altar. That I could be brave. That I could make my own choices. She squeezed his hand. Or perhaps I simply trusted the right man this time. Before Yates could respond, Two Hawks called for Rosalyn. With a final reassuring smile, she released Yates's hand and walked toward the Cheyenne women who waited to escort her to their camp. Yates watched her go, feeling as though something essential was being torn from him, a sensation that contradicted everything he thought he knew about himself and his carefully constructed solitude. As he drove the wagon back toward Diamond Creek Ranch, the freedmen beside him telling their tale of capture and relatively gentle treatment, Yates could think only of emerald eyes and quiet courage. For the first time in years, his heart felt dangerously, wonderfully alive. Diamond Creek Ranch erupted into activity when Yates arrived with the wagon and its former captives. Samuel Taylor immediately called for riders to spread the news of the safe return of the supplies and the urgent need to gather the items promised to the Cheyenne. You did well, Yates, Taylor said, as they sat in his office that evening. Taking on a Cheyenne war party alone was foolhardy, but effective. I wasn't alone, Yates reminded him. Miss Ellis is still their hostage. Taylor nodded gravely. Judge Ellis's daughter. When word reaches Silver Creek, they'll be hell to pay. She volunteered, Yates said defensively. If not for her, we might not have negotiated successfully. I believe you, Taylor assured him. But her father may see things differently. We need to gather the payment and a rescue party immediately. Yates leaned forward. No rescue party. Just the payment, as agreed. The Cheyenne will honor their word if we honor ours. And if they don't, then we respond accordingly, Yates said, his hand unconsciously moving to his revolver. But I won't risk her safety by arriving with an armed force that could be perceived as threatening. Taylor studied him thoughtfully. You care for this woman. It wasn't a question, but Yates answered anyway. I respect her courage. Taylor said noncommittally. Well, we'll do it your way for now. The payment can be gathered within 3 days. You can lead the delivery party. Yates nodded, grateful for his employer's understanding. "Thank you." As he walked to the bunkhouse later, exhausted from the long ride and emotional strain, Yates found himself replaying every moment of his brief time with Rosalyn. Her directness, her resilience in the face of humiliation, her unflinching courage before the Cheyenne, all contradicted his long-held belief that attachments were weaknesses to be avoided. He had left his brother behind out of pride and stubbornness, and lost him forever. Now, he had left Rosalyn among strangers, and the fear of losing her was a physical ache in his chest. When had this woman who had stumbled into a saloon in a muddied wedding dress become so important to him? The question haunted him as he fell into an exhausted sleep, his dreams filled with visions of Rosalyn being taken farther and farther away while he remained rooted in place, unable to follow. 3 days later, Yates led a small party back toward the Cheyenne encampment. They brought with them everything promised: medicines, blankets, ammunition, and additional gifts of tobacco and coffee as a gesture of goodwill. Samuel Taylor had wanted to send more men, but Yates had been adamant. A large group would appear threatening. In the end, only Yates, the ranch foreman, and a young hand named Billy made the journey. They reached the designated meeting place, a flat plain near a distinctive rock formation, by mid-morning of the appointed day. There they waited, the hours crawling by with excruciating slowness. Yates paced, checking and rechecking their supplies, his anxiety growing with each passing hour. "They'll come," the foreman assured him. "Cheyenne keep their word." "I know," Yates replied, scanning the horizon for the 100th time. "But what condition will she be in? What if they've mistreated her?" "Then we'll deal with it," the older man said calmly. "But borrowing trouble won't help." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, dust rose in the distance. Riders approached, 5 Cheyenne warriors led by 2 hawks. And there, riding beside him on her palomino, was Rosalyn. Yates's heart leapt at the sight of her. She appeared unharmed, sitting straight in her saddle, her hair partly braided in the Cheyenne style. As they drew closer, he could see that she was wearing a beautifully beaded buckskin vest over her own clothing, a gift from her hosts. The parties met in the center of the plain. 2 hawks dismounted, as did Yates. Formal greetings were exchanged before they proceeded to examine the promised payment. Throughout the negotiations, Yates kept glancing at Rosalyn, reassuring himself that she was truly well. She smiled at him each time, a smile that seemed to hold new knowledge, new depth. Finally satisfied with the payment, 2 hawks gestured for Rosalyn to dismount. She did so gracefully, then spoke to the Cheyenne leader in his own language, surprising Yates. They exchanged words he couldn't understand, and 2 hawks laughed, a sound Yates hadn't expected from the stoic warrior. "Your woman has learned much in short time," 2 hawks said to Yates. "She has honored my wife's lodge with her presence." Yates started to correct him. She wasn't his woman, but Rosalyn spoke first. "2 hawks' people have been kind hosts," she said. "I have learned much about their ways. They wish only to protect their hunting grounds and families, just as we do." 2 hawks nodded approvingly. "Remember this when you return to your people. Tell them the Cheyenne wish for peace, but will defend what is theirs." With that, the exchange was complete. The Cheyenne gathered their payment and departed, riding back toward their territory. Rosalyn watched them go with an expression Yates couldn't quite read, respect mingled with something like nostalgia. "Are you truly all right?" he asked when they were alone. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the setting sun. "Yes, they treated me as an honored guest, not a prisoner. The women especially were kind. They taught me their language, their stories." She touched the beaded vest. This was a parting gift from 2 hawks' wife, Morning Star. Relief flooded through him. "I was worried." "I know," she smiled. "But I never doubted you would come." Her confidence humbled him. They mounted their horses and began the journey back, Rosalyn riding beside Yates while the foreman and Billy followed at a discreet distance. "Your father will be relieved to see you safe," Yates said after they had ridden in comfortable silence for a time. Rosalyn's expression grew thoughtful. "Yes, he will. Though I'm not certain I'm ready to return to Silver Creek just yet." "Oh," Yates glanced at her. "Where would you go instead?" "I've been considering that," she said. "The time with the Cheyenne gave me much opportunity for thought. I've lived my whole life according to others' expectations, my parents, the town's, James's." She met his eyes. I think it's time I discovered what I truly want. Something in her gaze made Yates's heart beat faster. And what is that? I'm not entirely certain yet, she admitted. But I know it includes wide open spaces, honest work, and perhaps— She hesitated. Perhaps someone who sees me as I truly am, not as what society expects me to be. They crested a hill. The vast prairie spread before them, painted in golds and purples by the setting sun. Yates reined Ghost to a halt, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment and the woman beside him. Rosalyn, he began, uncertain how to express the tumult of feelings within him. When James left me at the altar, she said before he could continue, I thought my life was over, that I would never recover from the humiliation, never trust again. She looked out over the landscape. Now I see it was the beginning, not the end. His abandonment freed me to find my true path. And have you found it? Yates asked softly. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. I believe I'm discovering it. These past days have changed me. I'm not the same woman who stumbled into that saloon in a ruined wedding dress. No, he agreed. You're more. Their horses stood close together, and it would have been the simplest thing to reach for her hand. But Yates hesitated, years of self-imposed isolation making him cautious even as his heart urged him forward. Rosalyn seemed to read his struggle. When I was with the Cheyenne, she said quietly, Morningstar told me that the greatest strength lies not in standing alone, but in choosing to stand with another. She held his gaze. She said I would find a man whose heart matched my own in courage. I believe she meant you, Yates. The words broke something open inside him, a dam that had held back emotion for too long. I've spent years convinced that caring for someone was a weakness, he confessed. That attachments only led to loss. Then you walked into that saloon, and in 5 days, you've dismantled every belief I built my life around. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? She asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Terrifying, he admitted, but also right. Like waking up after a long sleep. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. I'm not asking for promises, Yates. I've had enough of those that weren't kept. I'm asking only for honesty, and perhaps possibility. Yates looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. The setting sun illuminated her features, her eyes bright with hope and something that might, with time, become love. In that moment, the choice became clear. Continue his solitary existence, or risk everything for the chance at something genuine and true. Possibility, he agreed, tightening his grip on her hand. I can offer that. The word hung between them, full of promise. Before either could speak again, the foreman called from behind, reminding them of the approaching darkness and the need to make camp. As they rode on, Yates felt lighter than he had in years. The future remained uncertain. Rosalyn would need to face her family, explain her choices. He had responsibilities to the ranch, a life built around independence. But for the first time since his brother's death, Yates allowed himself to imagine a different path. One where solitude gave way to partnership, where the vast prairie became not an escape, but a home shared. That night, as they sat beside the campfire, Rosalyn close enough that their shoulders occasionally touched, Yates remembered what 2 hawks had called her. Your woman. The phrase had startled him then. Now, he found himself hoping that someday, it might be true. 3 weeks later, Yates stood on the porch of the small cabin he'd been building on the edge of Diamond Creek Ranch property. Samuel Taylor had offered him the foreman position and the chance to purchase this parcel of land, an opportunity Yates had seized with newfound determination. The cabin was simple but solid, with windows that faced east toward the sunrise and west toward the distant mountains. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention to the trail, where a familiar palomino approached, its rider's chestnut hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Yates set down his hammer and walked to meet Rosalyn as she dismounted. It's looking more like a home every day, she said, surveying his progress. Getting there, he agreed. Another month should see it finished. They walked together toward the cabin, comfortable in a way that still amazed him. After their return from the Cheyenne territory, Rosalyn had gone back to Silver Creek to face her family. Her father, relieved beyond measure at her safe return, had been surprisingly understanding of her decision not to remain in a town where she would forever be known as the woman James Peterson left at the altar. Judge Ellis had visited Diamond Creek Ranch himself, ostensibly to thank Samuel Taylor for his role in his daughter's safe return, but primarily to assess the character of the man who had captured his daughter's interest. Whatever he had seen in Yates must have satisfied him, for he had given his cautious blessing to their courtship. Now, 3 weeks into this new arrangement, Yates still woke each morning expecting to find it had all been a dream, that he was still the solitary cowboy who believed love had no place in his life. "I brought something for the cabin," Rosalyn said, retrieving a package from her saddlebag. A housewarming gift. Inside was a beautiful Cheyenne dream catcher, intricately crafted with beads that matched the vest Morningstar had given her. "It's perfect," Yates said, already envisioning it hanging in the bedroom he was building. "I've been corresponding with Morningstar through the Indian agent," Rosalyn explained. "She sends her regards and says that your spirit has grown stronger since she last saw you." Yates smiled. "She's right about that." They hung the dream catcher from a beam, then stood back to admire it. Rosalyn slipped her hand into his, a gesture that had become wonderfully familiar. "My father asked when we might formalize our arrangement," she said casually. Yates turned to her, suddenly nervous. "Did he now?" She studied the cabin's interior, not meeting his eyes. "I told him we were taking our time, learning each other properly before making promises." "That's wise," Yates agreed, watching her face carefully. "After what happened with Peterson, this isn't about James," she interrupted, finally looking at him. "It's about us. About being certain." He nodded. "And are you?" "Certain." The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Rosalyn looked around the half-finished cabin, her expression thoughtful. "I'm certain that I never felt for James what I feel for you," she said slowly. "I'm certain that these past weeks have been the most honest of my life." She met his eyes. "And I'm certain that I want to help you finish this cabin and make it our home, if that's what you want to." Yates felt his heart expand in his chest, a sensation both terrifying and exhilarating. "I started building it for you," he admitted. "From the first day, every window, every beam, I placed them thinking of you here." Her eyes widened. "You never said." "I was afraid to hope too much," he said. "Old habits." Rosalyn stepped closer, placing her hand against his cheek. "Yates Keller, when are you going to accept that some things are meant to be? That when James left me standing alone in that church, he gave me the greatest gift possible, the freedom to find you." The sincerity in her voice undid him completely. Yates drew her into his arms, holding her as though she might disappear if he let go. "I love you," he said against her hair, the words he'd been holding back for weeks finally breaking free. "I never thought I'd say that to anyone." She leaned back to look up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And I love you, not despite your solitary ways, but because beneath them, I found a man of such integrity and courage that I couldn't help falling." He kissed her then, in the half-built cabin that would become their home, as the afternoon sun streamed through unfinished windows. When they parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, "not because your father expects it, or because society demands it. Marry me because I want to build a life with you, here on this land. Because I've been half alive since Timothy died, and you've brought me back to myself." Rosalyn smiled, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Rosalyn leaned against his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me in that saloon? The night we met? That some men aren't worth the ground they walk on." Yates recalled. She laughed softly. "That too. But afterward, when my father came to take me home, you said something that stayed with me through everything that followed. You said, 'Their loss is my forever.'" Yates frowned. "I don't remember saying that." "Not aloud," she admitted. "But I heard it in your eyes when you looked at me, and now I know it was true." He pulled her closer, marveling at how accurately she had read him even then. "Their loss is my forever," he repeated. "I like that." As night fell over the prairie, bringing with it a canopy of stars that stretched from horizon to horizon, Yates thought of the path that had led him here, from the solitary, grief-stricken cowboy who believed love was a liability, to the man who now held his future in his arms. The road ahead would have its challenges, as all frontier lives did. But for the first time since his brother's death, he faced that future not with resignation, but with joy. Rosalyn Ellis had been left at the altar, abandoned by a man who couldn't recognize her worth. Yates Keller had abandoned connection, choosing loneliness over the risk of loss. Together, they had found something neither expected, a love born of shared courage, mutual respect, and the recognition of something essential in each other's souls. Forever, Rosalyn murmured, her head on his shoulder as they watched the first stars appear. Forever, Yates agreed, and knew with absolute certainty that this was one promise he would never break.